Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz. Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. On 17th September, it is after the illegal strike by the Zionist entity at a house in Doha, and 2 days after the extraordinary joint session between the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which gathered nearly 60 member states, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed a strategic mutual defense agreement. According to Saudi officials, it establishes a framework for comprehensive defense cooperation. The fine print of the agreement is still not in the public domain, but two aspects in the joint declaration have since been debated in print and on television. One is the term strategic, and the statement which is what the joint statement says, aggression against one will be considered aggression against both. The first Reuters story also spoke to an unnamed Saudi official who, when asked if the agreement also involved a nuclear umbrella for Saudi Arabia, which is a non-technical term for extended deterrence, the official was quoted as saying, "This is a comprehensive defense agreement that encompasses all military means," unquote. While Pakistani commentators tried to sort of play down the statement, Pakistan's defense minister made a statement on a local television channel in which he said, and roughly I'm translating that, "What we have and the capabilities we possess will be made available to Saudi Arabia according to this agreement." He later denied that this meant extended deterrence, but his words had already fueled the issue further. Still others began to talk about a Muslim NATO, even a Sunni NATO, and likened the clause referring to joint defense against aggression as Article 5 of the NATO Charter. It, of course, didn't matter that NATO's Article 5 does not have automaticity. But the remarkable thing about news analyses is that they do not like facts to stand in the way of a particular slant. It's the same with qualifiers such as Muslim and Sunni. But let's dive into what this is about. Why now? Is there any nexus with other developments, especially US President Donald Trump's supposedly 21-point Gaza plan and recognition of Palestine by some Western countries, beginning with the conference sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia in New York before the UNGA's 80th annual session? To discuss all this, I have with me Dr. Aziz Alghashian. Alghashian earned his PhD from the University of Essex, where he taught international relations and politics and Middle Eastern studies for several years. Currently, his research focuses on Saudi policy towards Israel, which is what I refer to as the Zionist entity, and more broadly, Arab-Israeli relations. With him is Uzair Younus. Uzair is Chief Product Officer at the Asia Group AI, which is artificial intelligence, where he leads the design of AI systems and transforms unstructured data and proprietary insights into actionable intelligence. Well, I don't know how to translate that into English, but it simply means that he's very smart. Prior to joining the Asia Group, Uzair served as director of the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center. So good to have both of you on the program. Let me begin with Abdul Aziz here.
Sure.
Let's begin with the timing of this exercise. Yeah. Now, the reason I talk about timing is we all know that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have long-standing, very close diplomatic relations and also military cooperation. For many, many years, Saudi officials, officers have been trained in the Pakistani military schools of instruction. They've been trained on the Saudi soil also. So all of that is there. Yeah. But why this sudden sort of formalization of this? Is this because of the Zionist strike in Doha?
I think, firstly, it's good to join you, Gal. And I agree with you that, all the AI acolytes speak to, we don't know what it is, but we just know this guy is smart. And so we're very happy to be here with him.
Yeah, that is very smart. I mean, in full disclosure, he's also an old and dear friend.
I'm sure. and is glad to be. Hopefully, we'll get good to be his friend now. So I think it is indeed. It came precisely not even after, I would say, just the Israeli strike on in Qatar, but I think more acutely it came after the Islamic Arab Summit. And in my opinion, I think there was a great deal of disappointment that came out of that summit, because I think there was a general consensus that, you know, lines have been crossed, and that there was a real hope. And I'll be honest, I think there was a general expectation that now there will be measures taken. We just don't know what they will be, but there will then be measures taken, because the anxiety of this growing military escalation was increasing, not only just from the start of the from the campaign on Gaza, from the genocidal campaign in Gaza, but really from the Iran-Israel war as well, the 12-day one. And so people were beginning to see, really, to be honest with you, the threat from both Iran and Israel in the Gulf, because you've seen these missiles that come out from Iran, and then you see this kind of air capabilities from Israel. So the anxiety was building up for a few months. I think when the strike happened in Qatar, there was, as I said, the general expectation. But when there was such lackluster resolutions that came out, when all of them said, "Listen, we really need actions and no more talk, just no more condemnation, and no more condemnation, and just we need more measures," and all we heard were condemnations and no measures. I think this is probably one thing that really was the main catalyst for this kind of signal. I personally think that this was mostly a signal, indeed a formalization of this relationship, but the timing can't be, it cannot be separated from the strike. And I think there was a general sense that there needs to be some sort of deterrence. And I think also there was a signal not only to exterior or external elements, but really also to the domestic, in my opinion, because I think all the Gulf countries and Arab countries, they had to show that, there was some sort of layer of protection or some sort of result, some sort of response to this. Moreover, and I'll finish with this, I think also because there was just the lack of the American capabilities, or just the disappointment in the fact that not only was there a lack of an American response, but perhaps there might have been dare I say, a facilitation, or that they knew something like this was going to happen. So there was a general anxiety, and I think this is the main catalyst that led to this Saudi-Pakistan deal.
Great. That kind of sets up the tone for this discussion. Uzair, one of the points that Abdulaziz has made, which I think is very important, is that, of course, there's the strike in Doha, but then there's also this emergency session that I talked about in my introduction, and to which Abdulaziz has also pointed out, that there was a sense, or an expectation, if you will, that after what has happened, which is so brazen and so illegal, that there's going to be a sort of rallying around the flag, so to speak, and that did not happen. And so the point that he's making, that the Saudis then decided that perhaps if we cannot have some kind of multilateral arrangement, then whether it's under the umbrella of the GCC or the Arab League or the much broader umbrella of the OIC, then let's have this bilateral arrangement with Pakistan. So I won't get your take on this. And secondly, as a follow-up sort of question, which also links up with this, do you think this reach out to Pakistan also has something to do with Pakistan's performance during the 4-day war against India?
Thank you for having me, Ejaz, and you, in a way, preempted my point here as well, which I agree with Abdulaziz that the Israeli strike on Doha and the lackluster response from the OIC, and then also the sort of questions around whether the United States was facilitating it or was somehow in the loop about this, etc., led to disappointment, and that opened the door. But I don't see a world in which, in that dynamic, where Pakistan had not performed the way it did against India, that this deal would happen. I think what we have seen is post Bunyan al-Marsus and Operation Sindoor, which is what both sides call the war, the short war that happened between India and Pakistan, there has been a regional and a global reassessment of Pakistani military capabilities, particularly Pakistani Air Force capabilities. And if you look at sort of the long arc of conflicts around the world in the last few years, you've written extensively, for example, about Armenia, Azerbaijan. You look at Russia, Ukraine, you look at Israel, and 10 countries at this point in time, from what I recall in the region, including Qatar being the latest. Aerial supremacy matters. And what the Pakistanis demonstrated was that despite all the talk about them being bankrupt, being declining power, being a dysfunctional state, they pack a military punch and they can control and own their own skies and take a larger adversary head on in a very capable way. And I think that's what the region looked at and said, hang on a minute, this is a partner that we've worked with for a long time, and this partner packs a punch. And so let's go get that deal across the line. And I think also for Pakistan, this was important because post-war in Yemen, the Saudi war in Yemen, the sort of we saw a little bit of sort of shakiness to the Saudi-Pakistani relationship. It took a while for it to recover from there. And that these two events opened the door to sort of say, let's get past that and let's seal a deal. And let's have this mutual defense agreement. And I think it's a major inflection point for the region because it anchors Pakistan in the West Asian, Middle Eastern theater and I use this in a tongue-in-cheek way, as a net security provider. For all the talk of net security providers in Washington over the years, nobody would have talked about Pakistan emerging as that net security provider, but this is sort of the deal that seals Pakistan as that net security provider in the region.
That I want to take this point that you've made in passing, but I think it's a very important point. I want to take this to Abdul Aziz. That is with reference to the Yemen war. But since you are based in DC, my quick follow-up question would be that from what we have seen recently in terms of the meetings between Trump and, firstly, Field Marshal Munir, and then now Field Marshal Munir and the Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif. It seems to me that what is happening here, in terms of the bilateral thing with Saudi Arabia, the visit of the Iranian president, Mr. Pezeshkian, to Islamabad, the Americans are not particularly, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't want to put a spanner in the works. It seems that Trump thinks, and I really want to get your take because you obviously in close proximity of a lot of these think tankers. What do you think the American calculus here is?
Well, look, first up, the traditional think tankers in Washington are out of the loop. And they are fully disconnected from what this administration and this president is trying to do. Having said that, there are two things that I've sort of gathered in terms of what the approach here is. One, and I'll point you and your audience to this as well. When the Saudi defense minister tweeted about this agreement, hours after it was signed, the tweet prior to that one was his meeting with the CENTCOM admiral commander. I don't think it was a coincidence that the Saudi defense minister was meeting with the CENTCOM chief hours before the pact was in. I think the Americans were in the loop and were supportive of this pact. Secondly, in Washington, around the MAGA circle, so to speak, there is an emerging view that what the United States needs to do is have the Arabs, led by Saudi Arabia, begin to take over ownership of the security arrangements of the region, starting with places like Gaza, and if their genocide ends there and there's a ceasefire, but also in places like Syria, where the Turks and the Saudis are trying to reach some level of agreement, etc. And in that framework, Pakistan fits in really well in the CENTCOM area of operations, so to speak, where CENTCOM's view, and this, from my understanding, goes back to the days of General Kurilla when he was commander, and tried to make this case to the Biden administration, which disagreed with it at that point in time, that Pakistan was critical to broader security in the theater that the CENTCOM operated in. And when the administrations changed, and the assessment was done, or the reassessment was done about this strategy, that the inner circle of the administration sort of looked at the value of this proposal. And now I think they're beginning to move towards that. And the Saudi-Pakistan compact is, in my view, the first step in that direction.
Right. You put a lot on the table. Abdul Aziz, let me begin with that Yemen point that Uzair referred to. And I'll be very honest with you. When this was happening, a couple of op-eds that I personally wrote, I was opposed to Pakistan becoming a part of this Yemen war, because my assessment was that this war was not going anywhere and it's going to basically destabilize the region. And then there was also the sectarian issue, which is very, very sensitive for us. For various reasons, our contiguity with Iran, our traditional relations with Iran, but then also our traditional relations with Saudi Arabia, and the kind of regional tug of war that has been going on between Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's partners and Iran has had a pretty deleterious effect on us, not just in terms of the tight rope walking for the state, but also in societal terms, because we have very large Shia population, and so there's been this divide, unfortunately, which we're trying to bridge. Secondly, within the Pakistan army, or the Pakistan military, I would say, all three branches, sectarian affiliations or religious affiliations are never played up. We do not, there was this talk about the contingent that's going to go to Saudi Arabia should not have a Shia officer, should not have Shia officers or personnel, and that was unacceptable to the Pakistani military. So that's one point. And I raised this point also because, I pulled up this op-ed in Arab News by Dr. Jamal Al-Harbi, who is the media attaché here in Islamabad. And clearly this op-ed was vetted, and it presents the Saudi official position. Among other things, he talks about Iran. You also talked about Iran. So this really creates a problem for us. So our contention has always been to, if we are going to face the external enemy, which in this case is a Zionist entity, then we have to close ranks. And the only state that has stood up to the Zionist entity has been Iran. Not entirely altruistically, but it has stood up. So I just want to get your take on, because a lot of our viewers would be interested in a clear response to this. There is this, a sort of sense conveyed by many people that Pakistan might just be getting into something which could be an alliance against Iran, and ultimately Saudi's possible recognition of the Zionist entity. All of these things. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just giving you a sense of how we're approaching this. So I really want to get your take on this. And then I will also read out some excerpts from Dr. Jamal Harbi's op-ed, because I think they're very important.
Okay, sure. So I think when it came to the campaign against the Houthis, was it Operation Decisive Storm. This is what it was called. It was our Operation Decisive Storm. And I remember the discussions that were taking place. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was that Pakistan would have joined if there was an attack from the Houthis or an offensive on the from the Houthis on the Saudi territory. But because it wasn't, therefore I think it didn't go through. And
we actually sent it to the parliament.
Yeah, and we went to the parliament. Yes,
and the parliament said that. So that was the cover that we were. Basically.
Yeah. So I remember that, and I mean I remember, and it was. I mean, as you guys said, it was a hesitation, but also I think the war in Yemen, proved to be a quagmire that many people I think didn't realize, and I think some people realized it later on. It was necessary to at least try to get the Houthis into a Yemeni dialogue, but of course that's a lot more of a difficult situation. When it comes to I think the relations with Iran, during that time when 2015, this was the height of not only the Arab Spring, but it was the height of the Arab Spring where sectarian sentiments were on a record high. And as a result, I think it was a very zero-sum game regarding Iran. The perception at the time was really also that Iran was kind of an existential threat. Throughout this time, especially after 2019 strike on Al-Baghaig and Al-Khrais from most likely either Iran or came from Iraq, the Saudi calculation changed, and I think they realized, okay, I think it's best to now begin to really recalibrate our relations with Iran. And now, and the point, I don't want to take too long, but so I want to directly answer your question. Now, the Saudi-Iran normalization took place in 2023 as an investment in the future relations with Iran. What it did was it changed the frame of the relationship, and it said, listen, rather than being an existential threat, we need to change this. You are now a regional neighbor that we have outstanding problems with. But we also have files that we could cooperate with. That's why it was broadening the scope of the relationship with Iran, which kind of communicated to the psychology and the threat perception within Iran. I think the Saudis knew, that, or they believed we were an extension of the United States somehow. And I think they're trying to signal this time and again and communicate this. Now, when it comes to the whole potential of siding with Iran or against Iran, or siding with Israel against Israel, this is very, this is one of the logics that I always argued with. Of course, as I said, my research focuses on Israel, and I've always debunked the myth that Saudi-Israeli normalization will manifest because of an anti-Iran axis. That's just not how Saudis will do this. It's not how Saudis think. Moreover, I think it's also worth remembering in 2023, after the Saudi-Iran normalization, Saudi was also in talks with or about Saudi normalization with Israel. So what this shows is that the Saudis are not against any, they don't want to be part of any axis, because they see themselves really at the front line between both Israel and Iran. And they don't want to be caught in the middle. And so I think there was this perception that, listen, we don't want to be part of an axis here against Iran, and certainly not going to be, and we clearly don't want to be an axis against Israel. Now, this is interesting, because I think during the 12-day war, with the Iran-Israel war, there were discussions and talks about we have to now have a Muslim military alliance, an Islamic military alliance, to fight the Zionist regime and Israel, etc. I don't think that was too overly welcoming from Saudi, because hold on, You want us to be on the front line of something when you're being finally in this war, and you don't want us to be in the front line? No. However, I think the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact enables a space of cooperation for military cooperation with Iran. This is one of the things that I think. I don't think it's going to be that this alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is an anti-Iran thing. This is not the case. This is, if anything, it could be maybe enabling some sort of framework that enables cooperation. I won't say an alliance. I won't say an alliance, because alliance is used too willy-nilly. A lot of the times we use it too much. Why do I say this? Because I remember last year, and I think it was November or October 2024, there were reports that Saudi Arabia and Iran were doing military or naval drills around the Gulf. Now, interestingly, there were reports. They asked the Saudi foreign minister. The Saudi foreign minister denied this, but he denied this very limitedly. There wasn't an overt denial. There wasn't, this is crazy.
It's a roundabout kind of, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a limited denial, which to me suggests that maybe it could have happened, but it doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. And it's also, again, a signal to Iran that, listen, this isn't out of the question. So I think now, maybe with these discussions, and I think personally, the Israel, not only the Israel-Iran war, but the genocidal campaign in Gaza has developed relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. During the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran before the war, before October 7th war, the people were struggling to find, where was the transaction? What happened here? Hold on, they're still supporting the Houthis, which is still a problem for us, by the way, and that's still an outstanding issue. Hezbollah, what is it? We were trying to find kind of the strategic utility of this relationship. Now, I think because of the war, and now because of the framework of communication and direct line of communication, we now see the strategic utility in this Saudi-Iran relationship. So the bottom line, the Saudi-Pakistan deal is not going to be against Iran. It's not going to be leveraged. If anything, it may enable limited relations with Iran.
As a matter of fact, I think that's a very important point, Uzair, because I think in a way, Pakistan could also be a balancer between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But interesting thing, just going back in time, I had roped in Abdulaziz for a program. This was a couple of weeks before the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023. And he and I were going to talk about there was a lot of talk about the Saudi possible recognition, normalization of relations with the Zionist entity. As it happened, we ended up doing a program on the beginning of the genocidal war in Gaza because, the original parameters of, and I still asked Abdulaziz, I said, there's any possibility of the Saudis going, he said, there is no way that that's happening. And so I thought I'll just recap that.
All right.
But I want to get your take, Uzair, on this, because I know that you have been writing and talking about this in terms of the sensitivities that we have. And I'm very happy that Abdulaziz has talked about the fact that this is not something against Iran. But I want you to tell the viewers, and since the viewers are not always Pakistanis, it's on the World Wide Web, why we are so sensitive, about these sectarian fault lines, and why there is there's always a sense that the state might just be moving towards a direction that the society doesn't particularly agree with.
I mean, look, in the sensitivities around Pakistan, right, this long history of this post the Iranian Revolution and then the Soviet jihad, or the war in Afghanistan and the jihad against the Soviets, and the sectarian sort of monsters that then were birthed in Pakistan on both sides, have impacted and elicited a strong toll on society, right? Even now, there are still thousands of Pakistani citizens who people don't know where they are because they marched into the killing fields of Syria as protectors of the shrines during the long civil war that occurred there between Bashar al-Assad and now the victors led by al-Shara and his government. So I think from the Pakistani side, it's important to frame this not as part of the an anti-Iran axis, and I agree. I don't see it as that. And I think, in fact, the statement at the United Nations by the Iranians just yesterday also welcomed this pact. So there's an openness there. And I think, in addition,
President Pezeshkian himself welcomed it, but he also talked about expanding it into regional cooperation.
Correct. And I agree with Abdulaziz that it opens that channel, and it also opens a channel between the Turks, the Pakistanis, and the Saudis as well. Remember that there is a likelihood of some contestation in Syria, of all places, between the Saudis and the Turks in terms of what comes next over there. And even in that place, Pakistan can and will be positioned as a trusted partner that can engage with both sides through various relationships that it has. Turkish officers are now training at the Pakistani Air Force academies, from what I read as an ISPR press release a few weeks ago. And then, of course, Pakistan has drone technology and other cooperative agreements with the Turks that perhaps one day might be useful to Saudi Arabia and other members of the GCC as well. So I think on the sensitivity with Iran, it is important also for the Pakistani government to continuously showcase that relations with Iran are in a good place, which they are, and the engagements show that that is where that is actually true. And then also find ways to explore areas where trust can be built between Iran and the Saudis in particular, but also the other Arab countries as well. Because I think, look, Ejaz, I think the recognition from what I've picked up, and I would love Abdulaziz's view on this as well, is post the attack on Doha, the Israeli attack on Doha. I think there is a recognition finally among Arab elites that they cannot just continue outsourcing their security to the Americans and purchase all of the advanced Western weaponry, which just sits in the hangars when they get bombed and their cities get bombed and nothing ever comes of it. I mean, I was talking and joking with an Arab friend of mine here in Washington. I was like, I wish the Qataris at least flew a few Rafales and sorties just over the skies of Syria and turned back. Just to do that and signal at least some willingness to, put your assets in the air at least, right? But, the recognition that the strong can do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must, I think, is finally setting into the Arabs, and they realize that they need to invest in their own security and defense architecture. And I think in that, some level of SOPs around how they manage differences with the Iranians, with the Turks, is important. And there, diplomatically, beyond the military pact with Saudi Arabia, I think Pakistan can and will play a trusted mediator role to calm the tempers down if and when they do flare up.
Since you mentioned this phrase from the Malian dialogue, it's interesting that I was reading a book by Charles Hill, a long-standing experience in teaching also and in practice also. And I realized that this term, this whole sort of Malian dialogue and the Peloponnesian War came to the National Security Council and later to the State Department with Dr. Henry Kissinger, who had taught a course on this. But the fact is that anyone who has read the Peloponnesian War, especially the Malian dialogue, also must understand that Thucydides is saying, if you do this, you are going to overreach. And then, like Icarus, your waxen wings are going to melt. But, people
Can I get a quick two-finger on this? The other day, Netanyahu was talking about how Israel should be more like Sparta. And I was laughing on exactly this point because anybody who's read the Peloponnesian War knows that Spartan overreach and the long war between Athens and Sparta destroyed the Greek city-states such that Persia was later able to ingress, right? So if Israel wants to continue overreaching and conduct a genocide by being Sparta, well, Sparta did not survive for too long after overreaching in that way either, but people forget that part.
Neither did Athens. Yeah, but people forget that. And I think it's very clear from Thucydides' account, even though he died before the war had ended, that overreaching is never good. But let me, as I said, read out something from Dr. Al-Harbi's op-ed, which I think gives us a sense of what this is about. And he says, and I quote, "The newly signed agreement aims to expand military cooperation on multiple levels. Key elements include joint military exercises to improve operational readiness and interoperability, intelligence sharing to counter emerging threats, particularly terrorism and cross-border insurgencies. Additionally, it includes defense industry collaboration with potential for technology transfer and co-production of military equipment, as well as capacity building and training, building on the long-standing tradition of Pakistani military personnel working with Saudi forces." Now, before I take this to Abdulaziz, very quickly, Uzair, some weeks or maybe a couple of months ago, you and I were having this exchange, and you had made a very interesting point with reference to Pakistan's economic sort of stability and all that. And you said that Pakistan, given the direction in which we have taken our defense industry in some ways, we could actually build on that. I remember you making that point. So going by what the op-ed says, do you think that there could be a combination of the Saudi capex with the Pakistani innovation in terms of, in drone technologies and missiles and a number of other areas?
It has to go down that path, actually, for this pact to really have teeth and really be sustainable. The industrial integration, starting with some key defense lines as articulated in that op-ed, has to start. And I think the Pakistanis in particular have to realize that if their ask for providing mutual defense to Saudi Arabia is only going to be deferred oil payments or discounted oil and some bailouts when they need it, then they're doing themselves a disservice. The opportunity here is to actually use, exactly as you put it, the capex from Saudi Arabia, bring together expertise that is already in Pakistan around these technologies. Pakistan is also investing in a rocket force. There is shared technology there that needs to be invested in as well, and bring in Turks as well, if and wherever feasible, because of their advances on the drone side in particular, and create this defense industrial side, because that gives Pakistan not only the capex and the investment it needs, but also allows it to build an industrial backbone that prevents future economic crises from occurring. And so far, this is something that, in private conversations, I've been trying to argue with Pakistani interlocutors, is that whatever you do, just do not go back to Riyadh and ask for discounted oil and deferred oil payments and cheap loans. Use this opportunity to build the industrial backbone around this defense pact, because if you don't, then very quickly you may find yourselves in a situation where the Saudis once again are tired of you just asking for handouts, and that would be a missed opportunity.
Yeah, Abdulaziz?
No, I agree completely. I mean, I appreciate this, and I'm very happy that these guys are getting sound advice from you. So because that is indeed true. Because there's one thing here, and to build upon, because also Saudi is developing its own military complex, trying to build its own industry. I think it's SAMI. And it's trying to build upon and make an indigenous military industry. There's still some way to go, but I think it's open, and I think this is where the Pakistani industry can really overlap with the Saudi intentions of industrializing the military production. And so so I think there's just one thing here. There's an aspect where this deal has horizons not only in just purely defense, but also in economic aspects as well, and in befitting with the whole trajectory of 2030 vision, which is Saudis trying to really diversify their economy. So that's how it also fits in, and I think maybe that's one of the things that I maybe ascertain from the op-ed of Al-Harbi from Arab News. The other thing that I would say is that I really appreciate this notion of, if you go there with asking for handouts or cheap loans, you're not going to get anything from the Saudis any longer, because the Saudis have changed the way they do this now. It really is important to note, and a lot of people I think haven't really appreciated this, that Saudi Arabia is undergoing through its own reconstruction. Everyone is talking about reconstruction in Gaza, reconstruction in Syria, reconstruction here, there, as if handouts. And the Saudis now, and not only the Saudis, but the GCC in general, but in particular the Saudis, because I think it's a far more pressing issue for the Saudis. Reconstructing the economy is an existential question now for Saudi. And it knows that it needs the partners. It can't, Saudi first doesn't mean Saudi alone. This is because Saudi can't afford to be working alone only. However, here it's a particular way of cooperating with the Saudis and knowing how to cooperate with them. So if you go there and just say, listen, I have these, would like you to fund this, and so, we're easy to suss out this. If you go to like what you said, listen, there are these initiatives that we could develop that you and I and many of us and others can join and benefit everyone, then this is something that I think that will resonate with the Saudis far more. So I think this is also an opportunity to develop other things. And just the one last point, I would say this about the externalizing, I think, the military dimension. In my opinion, I was someone who was not very much caught up with this whole multipolarization. And right now, Saudi seeing the things as in a multipolar world, indeed. But one of the things that I used to say is that Saudi, I think, views things in a very asymmetric multipolar world. In other words, that there is still preference of working with the United States, but it will not hesitate to go to others. Now, I think after this war, and after I think the attacks, and I think currently there is, in my opinion, it's not about buying or selling from the United States. It's the level of dependency of the United States. I think this is the thing that is focused on, is to what extent are we depending on the United States for our direct security? And this is where the change is happening. The change is happening there. We'll still want top military hardware from the United States. I don't see that changing, but it's the level of dependency. And this is one of the, and another few things that come out here, because I think this speaks to the whole Saudi-Israel potential normalization, because the whole Saudi-Israel normalization thing was predicated on a security umbrella from the United States. Now, what is the point of the security umbrella from the United States if this security umbrella from the United States is viewed as compromisable by the state that they want to normalize relations with? It doesn't fit. And there's also a saying that I'll share with you, gentlemen, and to the viewers. Here in Saudi, I think there is this saying that was kind of in the street: whoever covers up, uses the United States to cover up with, is naked. This is the sentiment. This is the view. And what's interesting about this is that this is what we said colloquially. Now it's kind of risen into kind of bigger statement. I won't say statements, but bigger reports and pieces written by bigger people, senior journalists, I would say. And so I think that calculation of dependency, it's the dependency. I think it's to what extent can we depend on someone else? That I think that was always there, especially after 2019. right now, 2025, I think it just accelerated this. But let me just give another thing, and then I'll be quiet here. I don't see this kind of hasty shift. I don't see Saudis kind of saying, or any in the region saying, we no longer want this. We're against the United States. We're going to side here. The Saudis and the GCC will play this balancing role, but this balancing role should not come at the expense of its security, which is really changing this calculation and level of dependency of its security.
No, I hear you. But my own sense is that the hand of the states in the Gulf will be forced by this Zionist entity, which has now become a rabid dog, prepared to do things which no one is going to accept, because beyond a certain point, everyone will be pushed into rethinking. Frankly, as someone who has also looked at the Zionist entity for a very long time, there are a number of reasons, not least the American policy, among other policy strands, of providing the Zionist entity with a qualitative military edge against everyone else, including against the United States' own Gulf allies and everyone else. But there's so much else to talk about. But I was kind of taking notes about this. So Trump and I actually call Netanyahu Satan-yahu. They're going to meet on Monday, and some of the salient points of Trump's supposed 21-point plan that have come out, of course, release of all captives, permanent ceasefire, governance of Gaza without Hamas, which I think is completely fantastic, Arab and military force and funding for rehab and rebuilding of Gaza, and a promise of no annexation of occupied West Bank. And so I was kind of doing a whiteboard exercise on this. And so there's going to be a transitional international governance for Gaza, which is also something that the UAE in July last year had talked about. And then IDF's gradual, IOF's, in fact, it's the Israeli occupation forces, gradual withdrawal. So while some part of Gaza is being reconstructed and rehabilitated, there's another part of Gaza where fighting is still going on, which makes no sense at all. It's completely nonsensical. And then the Palestinian Authority invites an international force under a one-time UNSC resolution under Chapter 7, and which of course means enforcement also, to give it mandatory powers but no permanent UN role. It will be overseen by an international board of governments, including the United States, some Arab countries, and presumably the Zionist entity itself, which is as fantastic as things can likely get. So before I close, I want quick responses from both of you to this supposed plan. Of course, once these two people meet on Monday, even though Trump has been saying that there's not going to be annexation of the occupied West Bank, we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see how this is going to pan out. But my initial reaction to this is that this is a non-starter. Abdulaziz?
Well, I think firstly, the whole reconstruction plan, all of these things are nothing fundamentally different from the first few days of the war. Even in our discussion that we had, we were all this is just a reiteration of all these different things. As soon as the war started, it was all about what's the day after. So this day after has been 2 years after. So here's the obstacles. In my opinion, I think the whole reconstruction plan, the basic principles was that it needed financial buy-in, all the Arab states or the states that were involved said, listen, we're ready to use our money here, but how do we know that this won't get bombed the day after as well? This will get bombed the day after. And so this presented itself as new kind of leverage when we did not have much leverage. We said, okay, you need something, then this is something that we could play. However, it must be as legitimate as possible, and this is now a new opportunity to get the PA back into Gaza, which is something that I think people were trying to do for a long time. The whole point, I think, for Netanyahu, he did not want this because he wanted Hamas to be there. He wanted Hamas to be there so he could say exactly what he's saying now, which is, we don't want a two-state solution. How can you offer a two-state solution if Hamas is going to be there? That's why he allowed Hamas to be as strong as it is now. But I think the bottom line is that if there is this invitation by the PA, it makes everything more legitimate. And it makes, I think, from the regional point of view, legitimate because it breaks that from the Israeli occupation forces. It does not connect a chain of a connection. It doesn't. It deconnects this. It delinks this. Why is that important? Because I think for the legitimacy of any kind of potential forces, and this is why the PA. The PA itself is very important for this invitation. And I would say just the last point here about sending actual military forces. We also have to be very wary about, the extent of the military forces that they're going to send. I mean, we barely sent military forces in Bahrain in 2011. We did, yes, but that was very feasible, very difficult, I think, inside Yemen also, to send it to Gaza. So I think the nature of the role that they're going to play is somewhat of a supplementary role. I don't anticipate anything. And of course, here, if there is any notion of coordination with the Israeli forces, this is a non-starter.
We have seen that. I mean, there's no coordination between the IOF and the Egyptians, where there has been a lot of coordination and the rest of it. So, I mean, one can do an entire full program on this very aspect of it. But since I have to close the program, Uzair, quickly, what are your thoughts about this so-called plan?
I think it's a plan that, as Abdulaziz said, could be pushed if there are some openings here and could be something worth pursuing. I think the more interesting thing I'm following is, where does Donald Trump go with Netanyahu post-Monday? My read of this situation is that what Bibi is risking at this point in time is a rupture with the only man left standing between him and political isolation of Israel and America at this point in time. And American politics for years has had a bipartisan consensus on giving that qualitative edge to Israel and protecting it. But right now, on the left and on the right, there is complete anger at the way in which Israel is behaving and forcing the hand of the United States in a region where it does not want its hand forced. And I think that if the president breaks with Bibi, and I think this whole dinner at the UN followed by this plan is basically a way to sort of tell Bibi, here's an option for you to get out of this bind that you yourself have put yourself in with the ongoing genocide and the dramatic isolation of Israel. And if you don't go and play ball on this, then we will have severe repercussions for you in the bilateral relationship. And I think that rupture is only going to grow in the years to come, primarily because of the fact that on the basis of both Republican and Democrat politics in America right now, Israel is not popular. And I think if the president decides to break with Netanyahu, then we are in for a brave new world of American-Israeli relations, which I think many people, again, in the Beltway, the sort of old hats at the think tanks are not anticipating. But if you just watch MAGA programming on the internet, you know that this is a very different perspective on Israel now in that party.
And let me just add just one quick thing. Sorry about this, but I really appreciate this because there is indeed a change, but I think also Netanyahu feels like he could out manipulate or manipulate and outfox Donald Trump, because I think one of the things in DC now is, I think the hollowing out of all these institutions is something that I think they are picking up in Israel or Netanyahu, and they're investing in that. You know, they're using that, but I have to say the sentiment has changed. And let me just say this also, one more thing, because of the Palestinian recognition. The Palestinian recognition was treated as very symbolic, and it is indeed symbolic. But we can't just throw the baby out with the birth water as well, because I think here the symbolism enables itself to say, listen, if I want to punish Israel, or I may not really want to punish Israel per se, or have ramifications or measures on Israel. Instead, I will just show my dyspathy or my disappointment with Israel through supporting something within the Palestinian state. Yeah. So there is that better framework there, and I think now, even though it's small steps, it's a position. It's positioning itself, and it's gradually, if it's positioned, in relation to internal dynamics in other places, it could turn into tangibles and materialize into some small things and get the ball rolling. So I think the Palestinian state is something of worth focusing on here.
No, absolutely. I mean, you see, the thing is, and Uzair has actually preempted me on this MAGA thing, because I wanted to close the program with that. It's amazing. I mean, the MAGA infighting is amazing. The fact that Tucker Carlson is being brought on his program by, Glenn Greenwald is bringing Tucker Carlson on his program, reference the 9/11 files. The Young Turks are discussing the 9/11 files of Tucker Carlson on their program. I mean, the entire sort of, the entire MAGA-verse is now kind of unraveling, the warp and move of it. So we haven't, and by the way, we haven't seen the last of it. There's more to come. And then, of course, this entire Charlie Kirk assassination thing and the conspiracy theories and the rest of it is, all of this is really something that, and I agree with Uzair that it's going to be a brave new world. With due apologies, of course, to Aldous Huxley. A brave new world if Trump basically cuts Netanyahu loose. That's something that would be worth watching, because then we'll have to see how the Zionist entity begins to unravel internally. But thank you so much, Dr. Aziz Alghashian. Always a pleasure. Uzair Younus. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button and send us comments. It doesn't get us any lucre, but it'll certainly make us happy. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.